I think it's one thing to look at something on TV or a documentary or whatever venue you look at stuff, read about, hear about my friend who's whatever trans, but then to sit down and have within 5 feet of another person a conversation that included some empathy and some efforts for understanding, and then my own storyline in my head going, yeah, this will never fly at my church. And it was a beginning of a melting of an unknowing and a little bit of fear, and then a little bit of practicing in my head, how can we get there?
That was the voice of Reverend Doug Meyer, one of our associate pastors at Treach Memorial United Methodist Church in Flower Mound, Texas. I'm your host, Alyssa Robinson, and I am so glad you are here with us listening to the Life Plus God podcast as we roll around in the question, how can we work toward the inclusiveness of God's love? Inclusiveness is a tough word because I think sometimes we don't really know what it means to be inclusive. And sometimes we think we're being inclusive when we really aren't. Or we like the idea of being inclusive. But then when the rubber really hits the road, we're like, wait a second. Do I really want these people sitting next to me in the church?
Absolutely.
So let's do it. Let's talk about inclusiveness. Scary word.
We like the idea of it in theory, but then once it becomes practice or we get into the weeds of it all, then we begin to kind of do the slow walk to it. And because inclusivity, it's kind of a buzzword right now. In a lot of places, it's a buzzword around LGBTQ plus issues. But it really is, that's just a piece of this humongous issue of difference and how we live and do life with people who are different from us in a zillion different ways. And, we become exclusive at the very beginning based on things as simple as skin color, as simple as language, as simple as education, and we craft our world. And man, there's a gazillion things that play into that, right? Your upbringing and your parents' upbringing and where you were brought up and your education and all of that creates this kind of wonderful melting pot that we get to sort our way through.
Well, okay, let's talk about, you kind of mentioned this buzzword of inclusive, and a lot of people are talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and it's in so many different organizations, and there are careers being made out of this, and it's something that we're working towards. What is the difference between our cultural understanding of inclusion and maybe God's version of inclusion?
Oh, wow. Well, it's hard to speak for God.
Yeah, tell me, Doug,
when we were talking,
what does God say about this?
Talking the other day, God said to me, "Hey, Doug, tell the people that love all means love all." I think that sometimes we narrow it down to that, but that is essentially what inclusivity means, is that all people are respected as having worth and value regardless, and that we create the regardless. But God didn't create the regardless, I don't think. I think we were instructed to love all people. And then we begin to have these mile-long asterisks after that with exceptions. And then when you go back to the end of the list, God would say, all still means all. But God, what about? And I can't find anywhere in the text where Jesus said anything other than love your brother as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And there's countless verses, but they all go back to love one another. And then we, in our fear or our whatever, have added buts to that.
Well, how would you describe God's inclusive love? What does that look like? Because it's easy to say love all people, but I think that the word love, we sometimes don't know what that means. What does it mean to love in the way God wants us to? Because I think we get it wrong all the time.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of ways. I mean, the word that just immediately came to my mind was respect. And if I love you, I respect you, or I should respect you for just who you are. Just the very fact that you are breathing and present. You don't have to do anything else to warrant or earn my love, admiration, or whatever.
Well, I'm going to take you in a definition spiral. What does respect mean to you? Because for some people, respect means obey me. For some people, respect means because there's a lot of debate around what it means to respect other people. Am I just supposed to assume that you have the best intentions for me? Is that respect? Like, what does that mean?
So the word respect for me, so I'm just kind of making this up on the fly here, means that I hold you at the same stature that I hold myself. That I honor you. I feel like you have all the inherent rights and privileges that I have. And that I guess the other word that comes to mind is esteem, that I esteem you, that I wish only the best for you, and know that I hold no ill will towards you and hope you hold no ill will towards me. And that, I mean, in a way, it's kind of a soft, fuzzy, ooey gooey meaning, but that I can and would and want to do life with you.
Yeah, and that's why I think that defining respect is really interesting, because it is very much based on perspective. What I was hearing from your perspective, I'm not trying to like slam you or anything, but it's just a very white male perspective, is like, I should assume everyone has the same rights and privileges that I do. Mm-hmm. I, sitting across from you, do not have the same rights and privileges as you do. Like, people of color do not have the same rights and privileges. And it's like all of these intersections. And so that's why, like, I think it's so important to define these things of like, what does God's inclusive love look like? What does respect look like? Because we all have these blinders on of our own biases and our own perspective. And so, it kind of...
No, I get that. And I think that, I guess when I use the word, I mean, I'm aware of all of my inherent biases. I'm aware of many of my inherent biases.
Which, by the way, I would love to have all the same rights and privileges that you do. That's a good attitude to have towards people. Yeah, like, I'm glad that you want that for everyone.
Well, that's what I guess I'm living out of a naivete then, that says, hey, let's go do life together. And it's based on an assumption, based on white privilege or based on any kind of privilege that I've had, that I will treat you as my brother, as my sister, and man, let's go for it. And but it doesn't mean that I don't know that other people don't have those. And that's one of the things that's been a learning privilege for me over the last 10, 15 years, is all the different ways that others are treated.
So it's kind of like this shift of the assumption of loving and respecting others is seeing, hey, we're all on the same playing field, and I should treat you as though we're all on the same playing field and with love and respect and equality, and I shouldn't see people as lower than me. But what you're starting to see is we're not all on the same playing field.
Right. And, no, I have kind of a fairy tale image of that. But I'm pretty confident that I would be with you on the front lines of helping you get anything I have.
I'm pretty confident of that too.
Yeah. And so, I mean, in a lot of ways, I've lived a very charmed and blessed life, but not in every way, but in some, and then I've been witness to people who have dramatically different lives, and that, pisses me off, and pisses me off at times with the institutions that have upheld that and think that that's just the normative, that that's the way it should be. And, the big old world's a big part of that, and churches have been a part of that.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. Like, are churches a reflection of God's inclusive love? And if they're not, okay, so no. And if we're not, what needs to change? How can we change that?
Golly. Well, everything needs to change. I mean, I think the church is really composed of its inhabitants. And so what it's about is that other fun word we're using nowadays, deconstruct, is people on their own journeys have to take advantage of a moment of insight, whether that's through a relationship with somebody else, whether that's maybe they learn academically, maybe they learn experiential, however they learn, to begin to see, I'm a part of a structure that contributes to setting people apart and to kind of having a great big old bouncer at the door, so to speak, that's invisible, but that is communicated to people in its geography and its demographic and every other sort of way.
What are some of the things that you see just in general in a way that the church is being exclusive?
Well, I think it's exclusive in its mindset that it thinks it's being inclusive.
That's what I was thinking about too, is like there are so many ways that we think we're being inclusive that's actually exclusionary. And I'm having trouble thinking of a specific example, but it's just like this feeling that I have. And maybe it's even like the language that we use. And you mentioned like we become so tribal. And when you walk into a church, do you even understand what people are talking about if you're not embedded in that church and that culture and that upbringing? And
no, you don't, because there is an underlying there is a language that is assumed spoken by all that right off the bat we know it's not true. There is a structural presence that is assumed welcoming to all, and that's not true. Every different group who you would want to come and feel welcome here has a different expectation of walking into a big affluent looking building and being, wondering about the rules and am I greeted like I belong here? Or am I questioned, or am I looked at differently? And then do I even think, man, these are not my people? What am I doing here? And so to create a setting that somehow communicates that, the church, I think, is a long ways away. I mean, I think we do things out of our ignorance, and it's really more tokenism of we're just going to have somebody stand at the door and extend our hand and say, welcome. Well, that lasts about 15 seconds, and then you're in, and there's no other sense of what do I do from here? Where am I supposed to walk? Forward, left, right, upside down? Do I go around here? There seems to be people gathering, and they're talking, and I don't know any of them, and they don't know any of them.
Am I allowed to eat those donuts? Do I have to pay for them?
All of that is going through a person's head.
Mm-hmm.
And as the church, I think we make assumptions that everybody knows what to do. Mm-hmm. That it's that everybody speaks church when everybody doesn't.
Yeah.
And
then if somebody who doesn't speak church comes into the environment and does something out of the ordinary, we don't react well to it.
No.
And I'll give an example where I messed up.
Yeah.
So I go to Oaklawn United Methodist Church. One Sunday we were doing communion, and they do communion every Sunday. So we were doing communion, and there were people sitting next to me who it was their first time there. And I had introduced myself. They were sitting next to me. And for communion, what they do is they have the ushers come down and release one row at a time, so it doesn't get congested and crowded and all of these things. Now, I know as a member of Oaklawn, they always start at the left and then make their way over to the right. And so I was just sitting there waiting and to be dismissed by an usher to take communion. And the people next to me stood up and just and I stayed seated because it didn't even register to me, they're trying to go take communion right now. And so this person tapped me on the shoulder and said, excuse me, can I get it? I was like, yeah, sorry. So I let them walk in front of me. They went down and took communion, and I just sat there and waited for my turn to be dismissed, and went when I was supposed to, and air quotes supposed to go. Then I didn't think anything of it. Well, after the service, this woman walked up to me and was like, hey, did we do that wrong? I noticed that like you went at a different time as us, and I just don't want to like step out. And I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, I'm so sorry. I was like and what I should have done was when they stood up, I stood up and I just
went with
go,
them.
just go, but I didn't, because I was like, oh, it's not our turn. So
I have
this
said,
ritual of like sit
here
here until the usher comes around. So they felt like an outsider in that moment, to the point that she came up to me after church and said, did I do communion wrong?
Yeah.
What? Like, it makes me so sad that and that means that that was rolling through her mind for the rest of the service, maybe feeling embarrassed, feeling like, and to the point that she was like, how are we supposed to do that? And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize y'all were standing up to go to communion. I should have gone with you. And I was like, typically, here's how they do it. And they release this way. But I was like, this is an open table. If you want to go down and get communion, you go get your communion.
Well, exactly. And if you listen to ours or any other church's instructional jargon, we'll call it, it still assumes that you've read most of the book, and we're just giving you the reminders.
Yeah.
That so we make an assumption, and that right there is exclusionary.
That was a small example of like I was excluding them in this experience.
We have this mindset that says you're supposed to know.
Yeah.
And you can apply that pretty much to anything. And if you think about it, there are other settings out in the world where you're supposed to know stuff. And that's what kind of guides, if you would, I don't know, social order or whatever, but just the next right stepness. Mm-hmm. And church is full of, landmines on what we know is the next right step. But we're not mindful that everybody doesn't know. Yeah. And just even the thought that there's a phrase, the next right step, right meaning correct, right meaning what, So all the different ways that we do church, I think, have an opportunity for inclusion or exclusion. It would be interesting to kind of like watch the entire worship service and think about every pivot that is based on an assumption that the person knows what's being spoken or what's about to be spoken or expected of them, and whether that's communicated or just assumed knowledge. It would be full of those. And then there would be people who would not like that because they're like, well, everybody is supposed to know how to do church.
Or the people who get annoyed with hearing the instructions every single week because they go to church every week for 20 years or whatever it is.
Yeah. But and as a person who does those instructions sometimes, I'm like, all right already. Do you know how goober it feels like to be up here in front of y'all?
The same faces that you see
every week.
Yeah.
So that's my own kind of self-monitoring of, I'm just not going to say it again.
Yeah.
And that's pretty insensitive to somebody who's like,
this is my first time here. I have no idea what's
going on. I have no idea
on.
what's happening. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's just the mechanics of worship. Like that's one small little element, like of the way that the church can feel exclusionary. But even on a grander scale, the fact that we're in a building separated out from the community, and we are like our own little club doing our own thing, and they're like, it naturally feels exclusionary.
I had an experience years ago. I worked at Big O First Methodist Church downtown, and we lived out in Mesquite, and we lived in kind of what I would call just a good old blue-collar neighborhood. And we had a friend down the street who my wife then said, hey, why don't you come to worship with us? And it was interesting, and this was maybe some of the beginning moments of my awakening. She said, oh, I don't have the right things to wear to that church. Mm. And I remember my wife came home really upset that there was a perception that you had to have the right things. The reality is that lady was right. There were assumptions of what were the right things. And everybody who wore the right things didn't recognize that they already thought, well, I know because I have the right things. And, those who have a lot of times miss that others look and go, oh, well, yeah, I don't drive the right car. I don't have the right education. I don't have the right attire, And that's one little piece of that inherent bias that people who have been born into that already have and don't recognize because they've always had it. Mm-hmm.
Well, from looking at like your personal beliefs, how does the idea of God's all-encompassing love play a role in shaping your personal stance on inclusivity? Has your idea of inclusiveness changed as your faith has grown and you've learned more about God's love? Take me on that journey.
Yeah. Yeah, it has. I think in all sorts of ways, in all of the, the big ways. So I grew up in a middle class, lower class, all white neighborhood outside of Houston. Went to church with all one color people. And wasn't really till I went away to college that I began to even do life with people of other colors, and began to appreciate our similarities versus our assumed differences. And in every, like all of the big ways of we'll call them the top 5 of inclusivity or exclusivity: race, gender attraction, gender identity,
education,
huge, language, so forth and so on. Every one of those has been a little creepy creep down the road of, oh yeah, this sounds so third grade. God loves that person too. And so all of those awarenesses, though, were banked out of experiences. And it's, gosh, of late, it's been doing life with people who are in or have gotten out of prison, and for some pretty hard things, and knowing still that, oh yeah, God loves that person. Mm. And so it's like this ongoing, like, imagine turning this great big book of life and like the next page has a whole new lesson. Oh yeah. Didn't really quite ever put to words that I was afraid of that person or doubted or had any kind of story about that person. In some cases, didn't even recognize that they were there, which says a lot, just that they had breath. And then got to experience the fullness of that, as well as the fullness of people who go, that person did a bad thing, and I don't think I can ever include or care about them.
Yeah. Those kinds of things are so difficult because I think that there's this part of us, this evolutionary part of us, that's like, if you are loving the offender, then you are not loving the victim.
Yeah.
You are choosing your side here.
Oh, absolutely.
And God, that's what is so difficult about God's love, is there are no sides. And that goes against our human nature to not have a side and to say everyone is equally loved, equally dignified.
Right.
And we're like, but look at everything this person has done. Look at how many people that they've hurt. Yep. Like, they need to pay for what they've done. And it becomes so overwhelming of like, how do I love this person and not make the person that they hurt feel even more hurt?
Right. Yeah. And my experience has been that people take a pass. Either they don't even want to think about it, or they have created a little storyline in their head that says, well, something like, well, they deserve it. They had it coming. They should have known better. They made their own choice. And so by them making that choice, I'm affirmed for making my choice of not caring about them. See how that little weird thing works? Like, because, quote, it was all their fault to start with. And I don't have a responsibility for their fault and their bad choices. And so I'm off the hook.
But then also, where is the line for healthy boundary of, okay, I can love this person, but because of what you did, you cannot step foot in this building again, or you cannot be a part of this church community anymore. But then, is that God's inclusive love?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that we that sounds really contemporary and really, like, oh, well, I'm just practicing good boundaries. And so that's another podcast for another day, is where are God's boundaries? And I think it just buys us time to kind of like the end of the day, all we want to do, I think, is feel safe and not have to deal with the big stuff of life. And so by saying, well, there's a consequence to every choice. There is. And in the midst of consequences, that does not remove you from God's grace, mercy, and love. But what people say is, well, God can love them, but I don't have to. I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure that is.
What are your thoughts on loving from a distance? Say, you know, peace be with you on your journey. You are loved by God, and you deserve respect, but I can't be around you.
You know, I think that's fine. I mean, I think we all have to do the best we can do. But could you, how close could you get? Can you pray for that person? Can you promise to do your own work in forgiving that person? Can you leave a door open that says, I would imagine, I'm okay in imagining someday reconciliation. I think a lot of times in this made-up world of feeling safe, we close all the doors. And the very fact of, hey, could you ever sit down and have a cup of coffee with that person? Okay, you know.
See, and again, perspective, right? Because as a woman who I know plenty of women who have been hurt in horrific ways, abused, assaulted, and harassed, and to say, would you be willing to sit down in this room and have a cup of coffee with this person because that's what God calls you to do? No.
Yeah. And
I don't think that's what God calls you to do. And so it's like, it's not just about fear and safety. Well, no, it is. It is about fear and safety, but that's also okay.
Yeah.
And so that's where I get tripped up on, like, what is it to be inclusive? Do I invite my abuser back in?
Right.
No. And so I think because I think boundaries are good. And I don't think to say God's love has no boundaries means I should have no boundaries.
Correct. But I do think that your boundary is yours and not mine. And kind of to that point of, I respect how far you can go and not go, but how far you can go and not go shouldn't affect how far I can go and not go.
Right.
Right. And so, because.
But also, like, that would mean the reverse as well, is like, you can't assign how far you would go to how far someone else should go.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm coming to learn that. You know, I get that. And then when I think that there's like this little super up close microcosm of it all, and then in the big world, which again is a conversation for another day, is just the whole notion of justice and our prison system and who and how we discard people, and we'll talk about that later. But in the midst of figuring out life, you know, I feel like, and I don't know that I'm always there, that I should have the same esteem for you, even though I might have radically different understandings and beliefs, fears and joys, than I do the next person. Just because you and I don't see eye to eye doesn't mean that gives me a pass on caring about you and hoping the best and working towards the best for you.
Yeah, I mean, this is hard work. Like, this inclusiveness thing is hard work. And trying to, I don't know if is there an end goal to working toward the inclusiveness of God's love? Like, what are we trying to get to?
How will we know when we got there?
Yeah, like, and what does that look like? And is it unique for each person, or is there a version of God's inclusive love that we're working toward?
Wow. Okay, let's see. I think everybody's on their own journey. Many of us are part of institutions that are on journeys. And so if you just take that as an example, so, you know, our church, our community, made up of, you know, a couple hundred people, all working in different ways, there will always be people who are at different points along that. And they're different points, not necessarily better or worse. It's just a learning continuum, right? And how will we be inclusive when the majority cross the finish line? When, you know, how will we know? I think maybe the best outcome we can hope for is conversation that says, we're not there. We're probably going to kind of know when we are. But even then, when we get there, there's a really good chance that we're going to look up and realize we're not even halfway there. That it's always just this continuing. Think about the ways in your own life where you think, man, I've really become more open-minded about ABC. And then a year or two go by and you have some kind of different experience and you realize everything I thought I knew, I only kind of knew.
Yeah.
And man, I have so much more to learn.
And the more I learn, the less I know.
The less you know. But see, is there room in our not knowing that we should still care for those that we don't even know that we're not caring about?
Yeah. Well, and that's what I was thinking of when you were talking about have we achieved inclusive love when 80% of people have gotten there, that they're included and they're loved and all these things. And I think that is a trap that we fall into as a church so often, is like we are creating worship experiences for the majority and saying, okay, this will, speak to the majority of people. This works for the majority of people. And we've been having a lot of conversations recently about how are we better serving people with disabilities, people with who may have sensory issues, or who both visible and invisible. Like, is our building wheelchair accessible? How accessible is it?
Right.
We're going through all of these things. And oftentimes people with disabilities are the last people thought about. But that seems to be in every story I hear about Jesus. It is him going after, it's him leaving the flock of sheep to find the one lost sheep. Like, what we are supposed to do as a church is constantly be pursuing those who are marginalized, those who aren't thought about, who aren't cared about by society and by people. But we do the opposite. We are just like, okay, this works for most people, so let's keep doing it this way.
We set a mark and we go, man, when we get there, we're going to really, that's going to be a noteworthy moment.
Or when we get a complaint from somebody that something's not working for them, it's like, well, we can't change our whole program because one person doesn't like it, or it doesn't work for them or whatever. Like, we can't change everything when we're a church of 2,000 people for 5 people.
I like the phrase you use them and go that, like, I think the mandate should be we're constantly pursuing.
Yeah.
That they're, and you and I both have been in a lot of meetings where we kind of created this sense of far enough, whatever enough is. Like, okay, we collectively feel okay about ourselves because we've done this much. Mm-hmm. And I'm
the annoying person who's it's never enough. That like every meeting we're in, like, okay, everyone's patting themselves on the back, and I'm like, not good enough. Keep going.
Yeah. Well, I think in every way, constantly pursuing. Well, because there are people, and I'm probably like this. I like my comfort too.
Yeah.
Just let me be. Can you just get off my back, Alyssa?
Just let me feel good about myself for a second. That I did a good thing. Yeah. And I'm the annoying person who's like, okay, good job, but we still have this, and this.
And I think maybe,
I need to work on that.
We talk like they are mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
Like, I think we should probably learn to feel good about where we are, but know that but we have room to grow. That sounds very cliche, but because the church is either ignorant or pursuing or beating itself up or just, head in the sand. And we just go and start some fits. And it all depends sometimes on just, an annoying presence of somebody who says you're not far enough, to somebody's personal, hey, this is my thing, and I'm going to just keep knocking on the doors till I get the right one.
Yeah.
And all of those are different pathways that I think we should be okay to receive. But sometimes out of either our own stuff, our own tiredness.
It's always ego, right?
Yeah, or just, can you just give it a break for a minute, lady?
Yeah, yeah. Can I just have a normal 9 to 5 like everyone else?
Yeah.
So I mentioned the story of Jesus chasing after the lost sheep. What are some of your, or maybe just one of your favorite Bible stories that illustrates God's inclusive love and what that looks like?
Wow. I don't know the verse yet, but I had one in mind. But when you were saying that, a whole other one came to mind of when Jesus ministered to the person with the demon, the demoniac, who probably struggled with mental illness or something.
We just didn't have the words for it at
that
time.
And was so shunned that this person, I think it was a man, lived in a cave, and everybody in the community was scared to death of him. And Jesus went and ministered with him and sat with him. And so, I mean, there again, that's a whole nother sphere of inclusivity. So we pick and choose our areas that we want to pursue to be included. And I think mental health is still way out there on the, it's past Mars. It's something that we'll get to someday. And we're not even sure. And even as these words come out of my mouth, I'm not sure.
I think we're starting to chip away at that. Like, it's becoming, at least in the circles that I'm in, mental health and mental illness is not an off limits conversation.
No, it's not.
And
but I guess when I think about it in the context of what does a faith community relationship look like with a person who is doing life with a heavy mental illness?
Yeah.
Because we really kind of cater towards most everybody in the middle of the road. And the margins.
It's the majority. Let's serve the majority.
Yeah. And just even that phrase, the margin, the marginalized. We go over there occasionally.
And then we
other
like
Bible
to show
stories.
off how we did.
Oh yeah.
Look at us.
Yeah. Well,
Look at how we're helping the marginalized.
Well, we really like to put it on social media and do a podcast about it.
Shots fired.
No, we do. I mean, come on.
You're right. You're right.
And in a way, it's I get the psychology of it. I mean, we hold it up, we uplift it, we affirm it. Hopefully, people will, it'll catch some momentum, some gravity, or whatever. And but the phrase that just keeps coming back to my mind is enough. I mean, that should never be enough. That just look at us. We did the 440. We made it one lap around the track. Okay. Buckle up. There's a whole bunch more.
Keep going.
Yeah.
The work is never. And I think that's one of the things that can feel defeating and overwhelming about it is the work is never done. The work will never be done. And we have to be okay with just continuing on and on and on,
just
working towards this. And that's what I like to think it is when we are doing those social posts or talking about it or whatever, it's celebrating like, look, we took a step toward God's inclusive love today.
Yeah.
Let's keep doing things like this.
Absolutely. And we would be naive to think that, I mean, just
but there's a dark side
the human
too.
condition is such that we need a way to go every now and then. We need kind of a rah-rah.
Yeah.
Then we take, get a glass of water or whatever and go, okay, so now we get to go a little bit further.
I mean, celebration mattered. Jesus loved a party, like it matters.
I see that as the next summer sermon series. Jesus loved a good party.
Yeah. Jesus house party.
Yeah.
Going back to, I don't want to give you, what's it called?
Whiplash.
Oh my gosh. Whiplash. I keep forgetting that word. Whiplash of talking about outside of yourself versus personal things. Yeah. But I'm just wondering if there's a moment in your own journey where you felt a deep grace or connection of God's inclusive love, that you were granted an experience of God's inclusive love.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And in a way, most everything, the storyline that had me excluded was a storyline I had created. I haven't totally vetted it out. Maybe you can help me with this. So part of my identity is that for years I struggled with an addiction to pornography. for many, many years. And the story I created was that if that were ever a known story, I would be jettisoned from the tribe. Tribe meaning men and women of faith, pastor, my clergy status, my occupation, my income, that would just be jettisoned. And so much of my identity was connected and is connected to being Pastor Doug that it just would be like I couldn't even fathom what life would be if there would be life after that. And so when I kind of really began to take baby steps into acknowledging that, naming it, saying it out loud, and people not just freaking out. And matter of fact, not just not freaking out, but kind of staying present. And in their own way, I'm sure there's some people who said, well, that weren't. But my experience was with those who stayed and who said, man, I'm glad you're getting some help. And nobody, to my knowledge, I don't think, ever said anything that substantiated my fears. That most everybody, if you came up to me, if you had any kind of face-to-face with me or a note or an email, was encouraging, affirming. There was a lot of Me Too-ness. And, that was overwhelming.
Was it this feeling of like, I didn't know God's love was this big? Or was it, I didn't know that the people who follow God could love like this? What was the shock of it?
So the story I had made up was that this was like an unforgivable. Like I always kind of in the back of my psyche, whenever I was just really tormented with it, would go, well, this is a secret I'll take to my grave. This will be the thing that, so I kind of had to see the story all the way through to the end. I suspected that God would eventually love me again. I doubted that other people could. That it would be one of those things that, like how we were talking earlier about boundaries, that people would be like, well, that's all good and fine, and that's fine for you, but I don't have to be in a relationship with you anymore. And the fear of being cut out of relationships was life drawing for me. I couldn't imagine it. And so that's like, I don't know now, 10, 12 years ago. And so through that journey, what I've come to appreciate, and it's still kind of hard sometimes, is I don't need to be esteemed and honored and valued or in a relationship with everybody. That was not a realistic goal or aspiration for everybody to just love and adore Pastor Doug. That's just silly ego people pleaser talking. But that I'm a good guy. That's an okay thing that happened, and that it's part of my identity, but it's not my total identity.
Did that experience change the way you were able to be inclusive of others?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I think that in one of those little groups that we've talked about all the different ways we're exclusive, people with addictions. And again, I don't know that I ever heard the institution church labeled that, but I had a suspicion of. Why can't you just stop doing whatever you're doing? I repeated the ignorant phrases that are heard just socially.
I think that the underlying torment of addiction, because I agree that addiction is one of the most like shame-centered experiences. And I think within the church, it comes from the place you are supposed to repent of your sin, go and sin no more. And yet when you're addicted, you keep coming back over and over and over and over again, and you can't stop because it's a disease. Like you can't, your brain chemistry is not allowing you to stop. And so it creates this weird, like when you're a Christ follower and you're trying to live into the Christian values, but you can't. I can't imagine that feeling because I haven't suffered from addiction. Like
Yeah.
that's not something but
Yeah.
I can see why that feels different than other things.
Well, yeah, I agree. And there are just these implied, you should be stronger than, better than, with Christ, you can do all things through Christ. There's this,
Where's your willpower?
There's a subliminal storyline that, you're just not praying hard enough, or it's something.
You're not trusting.
All of those isms, don't translate into addiction. But what does is this mindset, I think, of the addicted person that says, I should be able to, and then should translates to shame, and then shame translates to less than, and then pretty soon, because the church has done such a poor job of communicating the we-ness of addiction, that people just leave the church. They're just, they cannot continue to live in that torment of not deserving, shame, feel bad, feel guilty, feel whatever. And, I think an inclusive church is sensitive to the language of addiction and addictive lifestyles and families of addicts. I mean, that orbit is a whole lot bigger than just the person, the individual who is battling an addiction.
Mm. Well, the concept of inclusiveness includes breaking down barriers. And it sounds like in your addiction journey, there were a lot of barriers that you had to overcome, of prejudices, assumptions, stereotypes, all of these things that you had to break away from in your own personal journey, as well as the way that you see other people. Can you share a time where you were able to dismantle a prejudice that you held before becoming inclusive? And it might be towards yourself or towards others.
So, yeah, and you're going to maybe need to help me with this individual's name. Years ago, and maybe it was before COVID, I had a couple of occasions to sit and meet with a woman. Her name is Barbara, who was my first sit-down cup of coffee conversation with a person who's trans. And Barbara was inviting me, us, the church, to get on board with advocacy in the whole trans movement.
She served with Walk to Emmaus, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember her.
And was that before COVID?
Oh, yeah, way before.
Okay.
I think that was before I got married and divorced.
Oh, heavens. Well, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was long enough that it's happened and I forgot. Now I'm remembering. But, I think it's one thing to look at something on TV or a documentary or whatever venue you look at stuff, read about, hear about my friend who's, whatever, trans. But then to sit down and have, within 5 feet of another person, a conversation that included some empathy and some efforts for understanding, and then my own storyline in my head going, yeah, this will never fly at my church. And it was a beginning of a melting of an unknowing and a little bit of fear, and then a little bit of practicing in my head, how can we get there?
Mm-hmm.
And it changed my whole appreciation of and for the struggle, for the identity of somebody going through that gender identity transition.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember from the very first, like the first, I'll have coffee with you, kind of being just, some bravado and arrogant, and, I didn't let that out because, me, I just wouldn't be that ornery. But to beginning to understand, and this is the case, I think, with everybody, oh, that's a person. That's somebody's son or daughter, husband or wife, or whatever. And, man, they're really courageous.
Yeah.
And they've been really wounded.
That's one of the things. So Barbara, she had a huge impact on me too.
Mm.
And I think it's because she was so open with her story,
mm-hmm.
and she was willing to share everything about her transition. and how that impacted her family and how she's trying to rebuild her relationship with her kids. And are they willing to call me mom? Is there something different? And she was so open about what she was experiencing in her faith. And she grew up in Christianity, and she was actually a Christian artist, singer and songwriter, and that whole journey. And I think that she ended up being, she became the first trans woman to go on a women's weekend of Walk to Emmaus.
Yeah.
And it was being able to sit down and have a conversation with her and her be so open about all of this. And I mean, we say it all the time, breaking down barriers is building relationship. It's all about relationship. You can't break down barriers from afar.
Yeah.
You have to. And so having that one-on-one, because I think that she wasn't the first trans person that I had encountered, but she was the first person who was so willing to share her story and her experience. And it was such a huge learning experience for me, for her to describe, this is what I was feeling, this is what I was thinking, this is how it started, this is what it's done to my relationships, this is what it's done in my faith. And it was so educational.
Yeah, I agree. And that she functioned for me with kind of this level of vulnerability that allowed me to just be my goober self and, question and wonder. Where I got a little put off with her was the sense of expectation that I needed to be on board more to be an advocate with and for her. I wasn't at a place then that I could do that. What Barbara helped serve for me, though, was the setup of my brain to begin to imagine the world differently. And I think that was a necessary frontier for, had coffee the other day with a young person in our congregation who is in the midst of a transition. And, we talked a lot about what I need to know to be more supportive of her. Mm. And it was fun, and we laughed, and I've been able to talk to her parents, and then to begin to widen my the panorama of my view and realize, oh wow, there too, and there too, and here too, and so I think I would like to find Barbara again and say thank you. You really helped push this 60-year-old white dude in some ways he didn't know he needed to be pushed.
Mm-hmm. And 8 years later, you're still working on it.
Yeah. Yeah, my best friends. The brother he grew up with is now the sister he has. Mm. And learning to call her the right name and be around her and be appreciative. Like we said earlier, a long time ago, that respect. I use this phrase. I'm not sure I even really know what it means. Beloved child of God. Mm. This person too, one more person in the population of beloved children of God.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is the perfect example of what it looks like to work towards the inclusiveness of God's love. Is it's frustrating, but it's also beautiful, of these teeny tiny steps that we take. Just an interaction with somebody 8 years ago that was frustrating and challenging paved the way for so much change and growth. And that's what I mean is the work is never done. Yep. We're constantly on this journey toward that inclusive love, and it will continue to carry you. And I think that the best way for us to participate is just to be open to it, be open. And I think as a pastor, you have the unique privilege of people wanting to meet with you and talk with you, right? Of someone saying, can I grab a cup of coffee with you and pick your brain? Yeah. Can I ask you some questions about faith? Which is not something that all of us experience. I'm not on a weekly basis having people wanting to have those deep conversations with me. Yeah. I wish I did, because I love those conversations.
It's life-giving.
Yeah, it really is.
It feels like it's a special privilege, and I hope I don't ever take it for granted. And it just, in so many ways, affirms, I think, what you were saying earlier about awareness, change, education, is best accomplished, one relationship at a time. And both to be trusted and to, I'm just thinking about this conversation I had the other day of there were some times that I felt like I had to apologize for my industry, that I had to apologize for encounters she had with other people. And then she was very gracious. She said, "You're not responsible for every bad thing that comes out of somebody's mouth." And I said, "I know. I just guess in my mind, I want to imagine that the place that you entrust your presence to would be honoring of you."
Well, I do the same. I bury the lead that I work for a church all the time because I know that there's so much pain and hurt. And I do the same. I feel apologetic towards people of because most people that when they hear I work for a church, I can see them tense up.
Yeah.
And I know they're carrying some baggage of they've been hurt. They've been outcast. They've been excluded in some way.
So the old classic, be careful the conversations you get into on an airplane, right? Of my experience has been you'll get one of two or three things. You'll get either the other person who is so excited and wants to talk to you all about their faith. And frequently it's more of an evangelical kind of experience. The next one is they want to quiz you about all sorts of things in the Bible that
what about these contradictions
that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And they have a suspicion or they're assuming that you're going to defend it all. And a lot of times I'll just say, "Gosh, I don't know. Yeah, that sounds really whack, doesn't it? I don't know." Or you'll get the person who tunes you out, and then what has come to the forefront is perhaps they've been abused by the church in all sorts of different ways. Or hurt, wounded, whatever phrase you want to use, by the institution or somebody that represented the institution. So, yeah, I used to think, so I had this little line I used sometimes that I was in sales. It made me giggle on the inside because, well, that kind of is sales, but I don't know.
All of this learning that has happened in these conversations and experiencing new people and new ways of being, how has that shaped your pastoral approach to people?
I think it's made it more courageous, maybe. The last 5, 6, 7 years have been full of more what I would call edge experiences.
What does that mean?
Well, in pastoral life, there's the normal. Gosh, that's a great question. Thank you for putting me on the spot with that.
Sorry.
I did it to myself, didn't I? An edge for me is going someplace new that I've never been before. So the trans conversations, new and have never been before. Prior to my experience with Renew and recovery, addiction was a new and I've never been there before. And then that was a whole lot of different addiction issues, family issues, overdoses, all the hard stuff that comes with that. That's an edge. Mental illness and
suicide is an edge that I came up to. And it's
horrible. Yeah, you remember a couple of years ago, our good friend took his life, and that was. That's an edge that I went to. I didn't really go professionally. I went personally, and it's horrible. I don't know that I ever did anything with it except experience the pain of it. The experience with this person who's been in prison and just everything about that was new and different. Courthouse and court and people upset with a person and lies and then going to visit a person in prison and that's an edge.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, I don't know.
Well, can I share what I see in your approach?
Yep.
And I don't know what I describe. You might say, "Oh, yeah, that's different from what it used to be."
Yeah.
What I see in you is rather than coming to these edges, let's say, with an attitude of authority and knowledge, you come with an attitude of learning.
Yeah.
of like, and a willingness to say, I really don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know what to do next, but I'm here and I'm going to stand here scared to death at the edge of this cliff and look down.
Yeah, that's fair.
Like, and so I think, and because I do get that from you of like, there is an openness and like, because I'm a person who challenges. And when I challenge you, you never get defensive. You never get flustered. And if you do, you don't show it, you know?
Poker face.
Yeah. But you're always open of like, you know, I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah.
And I think that is pastoral.
I think that's also experience of just, you know, so much of who I am and my identity and my defensiveness changed when I did a lot of my recovery work, that it feels okay. It used to feel like Doug had to have an answer for everything in every situation. And that's very intimidating because God knows there's a whole lot of things I don't know anything about. But so to get past the need to fake it for your approval, the thing I think I can best offer to somebody is presence and honesty that just says, man, this is a big, hard, hot mess, but let's do this together. Was in a conversation last night with a young man who's facing probable prison time for multiple DUIs and voiced a lot of fear about, and I think maybe, I don't know, this is only the second person I know that went to prison, being discarded. And trying to assure that person, I can only say this based on my previous experience of prison doesn't scare me away. I can do prison. I can come visit you at prison. That's a no-brainer. And, you know, here's how that would look. But, you know, most of my experiences, unfortunately, have not always had that rich texture to them. You know, when you grow up in the land of white privilege, you really don't do life with a whole lot of people who are about to go off to prison.
Yeah.
And that's unfortunate, really. But again, that's
we should
a lack
put more
of
white people in
inclusivity.
prison. Sorry, that was inappropriate.
You know what? I have a list of some that I would like to propose.
No, I totally understand what you're saying is, I like that word, the rich texture of experience and understanding. And we have to be willing to step outside of what we know and step outside of the bubble. But it's so easy and comfortable to live in that bubble.
Yeah, it's just like melting into a leather couch, right? With just a big old snuggle blanket and a glass of wine and just, but there's something, I know now that I can't, whatever ministry looks like for me for the next 10 years or so, that I'm always going to be drawn more to the edge. And I don't know. There's part of me, not a big part, that's like, man, you missed a lot of opportunities. Because I'm sure there have been other people in the past ministries I've been a part of that were edge people.
Yeah.
And, you know, again, back to inclusivity. I mean, we, the church, like, for the most part, comfort and predictability. And inclusivity does not offer, for the most part, either of those.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think of, you know, oftentimes I hear as a challenge in the church, in a nicer way, is that there is a difference between being friendly and being a friend. And being friendly is that safe place of like, really, I'm in control. It's surface level. I don't have to invest much. I can just be nice on Sunday morning. But being a friend involves risk because there's vulnerability that happens and there will be highs and lows and there will be challenges and arguments and tension and all of these things. And like being a good friend is really difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree.
And we are called to be a friend, not just to be friendly. But so often the church is just surface level friendly.
Yep. And we use labels like one of the ones you will recognize that we like to use around here is radical hospitality. And I don't think that I think we're naive and we think that means, well, we'll just welcome everybody. But I think it's more than that. I think it is... to be radically hospitable means I see you, I honor you, I walk with you, I dance with you, I invite you to be more than just an observer. That then, how about if you take the lead now? How about if you plan and I attend? And, basically, we're content at the moment just to say, we think you're welcome here.
Yeah.
And we've not gotten to the shift yet that radical hospitality says, come be a leader, come be involved, come serve, come, let's argue over. That we still have you kind of nicely over here in this section where we like to sit the people who we.
Yeah. Well, okay. So as we grow and change, how do you navigate the tension between traditional teachings and the ever evolving understanding of inclusivity, especially within marginalized communities? Like, so you've mentioned, your growth with the LGBTQ plus community.
Right.
And that is something that in the traditional teachings of the church and the history of the church has been a no-go zone.
Exactly.
But as culture shifts and changes, then we as a church respond, hopefully, by broadening inclusiveness that should have been there all along, but we just didn't. I don't know. Like, where is that tension between, is culture driving our inclusiveness, or are we called to a different inclusiveness?
Right.
Is this making sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of the front lines of the, if you would, battle right now. Like, there will be people who are, we'll just call them less inclined to be welcoming, who say the church is succumbing to cultural pressure, that we should draw a hard line, and that it's very clear. And there's a lot of black and white, right and wrongness of how they interpret scripture or polity or history. And it's kind of like, the flag is planted and we're going to die on this mountain. And that's one mindset. And I have a hard time being in conversation with folks like that. The best I can offer you is, well, that's interesting. I hear you. Something that affirms, if it's a setting that seems somewhat open, I'll usually say, I'm not sure about that. I don't think that is, I think there's more to this than we understand or can appreciate. And my expectation is that that's our current interpretation is very limiting of God and God's will and God's love. I think it's energizing, and I don't feel any kind of faith threat to imagine different frontiers. And can the church hold in tension ministering where we are, but imagining ministering in a new and different place in the future? And man, I'm excited about that. I wonder what that's going to look like. I wonder what the church is going to look like well after I'm dead, and 50 years, 100 years, 200 years from now.
And I hope it doesn't look the same. Like, I hope it looks different and feels different.
There will be some of all of that.
There are a lot of people who are like, no, it has to stay the same.
Yeah. No, there will be some institutionalized. It's so grounded in that belief that will be that. But I think it will be dramatically different even than it is now.
Yeah.
I mean, just a ton more different. And the people who are wanted it to be the same will say, well, that's not even the church anymore.
Yeah. Well, and it just is echoing, the line, where is the line in God's inclusive love?
Yeah.
And for us to ask ourselves that, like, where's the boundary that we cannot cross to enact God's inclusive love? I don't know that there is one.
I don't either. I think that depending on what you believe probably about talking to God, praying with God, communicating with God, that's one of those, that's a great God question. God, is there a line? And what do we even mean by line? And does, because if you think about, go backwards 200 to 500, even 1,000 years ago, well, we've blown through many lines.
Oh, yeah. 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, we've crossed the lines that were in place. That's like, this is the
and even
no-go.
lines that probably people even the deepest thinkers couldn't imagine, right?
So when we're looking at what we can do from here, we've had this huge conversation around inclusivity. What can we do to contribute to the broader movement toward a more inclusive representation of God's love just daily? What are the things we can do?
I think lean into the things you don't want to lean into. Appreciate where you are and just sit down and do some self-check. Like it would be, maybe you can find this. Like I think it'd be great to do an inventory of what do you need to ask? What are the questions you need to ask yourself to imagine the boundaries that you have imagined, that you've created in your world? And are there any of those that you would consider opening the door to? And whether it's any of the things we've talked about or something we haven't even imagined, I think we as growing individuals have a charge to continue to look back on our own lives, to be circumspect or whatever the word is. What is it I don't know that I need to know? And
what is it that I don't need to know to love?
Yeah. I think a lot of times my experience has been the thing that I fear is the thing I need to go learn more about. And because my fear is rooted in ignorance. And so if I don't know about it, I make up, well, I don't need to know. I think I told you once, in my early 5-year-old Dougie Meyer theology quest of asking my mom about God, she said, well, Douglas, there's just some things in the world we don't need to worry about. And that, I thank her now for that, because that was kind of no, I think I do. I think I do need to not worry so much, but wonder.
Yeah.
No, there's just so darn much. And so, because the minute you or I become complacent and comfortable, we risk, I think, sliding backwards into the comfort of control and the comfort of, well, I want it to be like me and I want it to be about me.
And predictability and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there may be people we've hit a lot of hot topics today, right?
Yeah.
And there might be people who are listening who maybe aren't listening anymore because they're like, nope, not doing this. Or there are people who are angry right now, having listened to all of this and our views and perspective. For those in our audience who may feel hesitant or resistant or angry about the idea of a more inclusive understanding of God's love, what perspectives or insights can you share to encourage an open dialogue and exploration of this? Maybe like creak open the door or the window a little bit.
Well, okay, here's what I would prescribe. Go for a walk and just say out loud, is there a possibility that I don't know everything? Is there a possibility that what I'm upset about is something that's close and I need to explore? Is there a possibility that what Doug and Alyssa said pushes a button in me because it's been something I've long hidden about myself? And just be available. I think available says, the things I hear challenge me, I need to hear more of them instead of they need to go to hell.
Yeah.
And that's a big old, that's a hairy, bold statement to say.
Well, maybe not that we need to go to hell, but labeling us as heretics or blasphemers or something. But I don't think we need to go to hell.
Well, no, I don't think so. No, if I go to hell, I'm going to know a lot of the people there, I think.
I love that. You'd be like, I'll probably see a few old friends.
I think there will be a lot of friends there.
Well, thank you.
Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, thanks, Doug, so much for bringing, as always, your full self.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hope to do it again soon.
Let's do it. Y'all take care.
The Life Plus God podcast is hosted, written, and produced by me, Alyssa Robinson, and sponsored by Treach Memorial United Methodist Church in Flower Mound, Texas. If you live in the Flower Mound area, I invite you to stop by and see if Treach could be your new church family. You can learn more about all of our programs and events at tmumc.org. And I hope to catch you next week for our next episode of the Life Plus God podcast.